You would like me to use a microphone?
No, you can just say hello to the camera.
Hello, camera. Hello, camera.
We're live.
Hi. So, thank you for the invitation to come to Finland. It's only my second visit, and it has always been a country that fascinates me, partly because it is so different. From a European perspective, you are as different to us as Greece is to us as well, perhaps. The landscape, the language, the history. So, and of course, you have an outdoor practice, which is again has a different tradition and a different context and different social problems. So it is always fascinating to have the opportunity to come and to share and to learn in other places. I'm going to invite you to explore what I think is one of many cultural norms that underpins the adventure practices of the modern European, North American, the Western idea of adventure and adventure education. And I called the talk No Pain, No Gain, because I want to explore with you this question in our society, which I think we also reproduce in our practices in the outdoor field, the idea that the more you put in, the more you get out. And I want to explore that in a little bit of detail and to ask some questions about it towards the end, which we can explore further in the workshop afterwards, about what effort we might be making and what gain we should be looking for in the society of today and the near future. In other words, are there things we should change about the particular way we do our practice and the purpose that we have in mind for it? To start with, yeah, good. We're going to have a bit of T-Rex. Who can remember T-Rex? Hey, I could rely on Finnish hard rockers, I think. So this is a T-Rex tribute band, so don't get too excited. But it's not T-Rex I want you to focus on. We're going to watch a little excerpt about a young woman who comes from my community. And we're looking at this because she is a musician. She is not an adventurer. She is a talented musician. I want to take it out of our world into another parallel world where somebody has made a great deal of effort and has done very well. And I want to use that as our starting point, as a thought piece. As you watch the video, you will see her perform, and you will also hear some of the musicians interviewed about her. And I'll tell you a little bit more about her afterwards. But just bear in mind that at the time this video was taken, she was 14. So let's see. We need some music, some sound. Let's hope that's not too loud. We lost the internet connection. Okay. Thank goodness for experts.
monumenttia sit, jos ei se toimi. Niin.
Mikäs se näistä oli?
Joo. Ei tule. Avaa vaan siitä. Ei se. Missä on ne digiverkot? Niin se NHS.
While they are working on that fix, let me tell you a little bit more about her, as I would have done at the end in any case. So Jess Gillam is a local girl. Her parents are musical. Her father is musical. He is a drummer. And he runs a local band, a youth band, called the Barracudas. And Jess and her sister both got involved in the band and then got involved in playing instruments themselves. Jess found she had a talent for the saxophone at an early age. At the age of 12, she started looking for mentors, for master classes in the saxophone because the local teachers couldn't take her any further. And so she started to travel to Edinburgh, to London, and she found some amazing jazz saxophonists who took her along to teach her more of her playing. Courtney Pine was one of those. If you know anything about jazz, that might be a name that you know from the English jazz scene. Snake Davis was the other, and there were some more. At the age of 13, she was a very precocious 13-year-old. You understand precocious? You need to tell me either to slow down if I'm speaking too fast, or please ask if I use words that you don't understand and you feel you might need to. Precocious? Can you tell me what it means? Just so I can check.
In Finnish.
In Finnish? In English, do you know, can you explain it?
Same expression.
Not really, no. So she is very outward going,
Okay, so
very lively, a little
lively.
cheeky,
A bit bubbly.
a bit bubbly, yes, very bubbly. And she decided to promote her own jazz concert in the town. And she asked Snake Davis to come and make a performance. Our town is a tiny little market town on the edge of England. And it was a sellout. So the next year she did it again with two of her masterclass teachers. And then the next year, last year, Courtney Pine came to our little town and gave us a concert. She now travels with some of these jazz bands to play. She plays all over the UK with T-Rex now, the T-Rex tribute band. And she is, of course, also a classical player. And she was the runner-up this year in the Young Musician of the Year competition in England. She was very young when she entered it. She has 2 more chances before she is too old. So she has a very good chance, perhaps, of being the winner in her category of wind instruments at some point in the future. She's now 17. She's just studying for her A-levels, and she has a place at the Music Conservatoire in London when she finishes. That place will be funded by the money she made from promoting the jazz concerts back in our town. So the whole community has kind of put in to supporting her. When she was 10, she was busking on the street outside the cafe that her parents run. You know busking? Yeah. And the money that she was collecting from the busking would pay for the reeds in her saxophone and for a new mouthpiece sometimes. It's for the music. So her parents made her really have to pay for all of the costs of the music for herself, until later on she became sponsored by the people who made the saxophone that she plays, so she didn't have to buy the good saxophone that she now plays. Okay, so I think we abandoned that. You would have heard the musicians talking about her talent, her character, personality, her ability to perform, and about her potential. What is potential to become a very good saxophonist, maybe classical, maybe jazz, maybe a bit of both, as she gets older. And this could well be, and certainly this is her intention, it could well be a career for her. It's a really good example, I think, of this idea of someone who's made a lot of sacrifices, put a lot of work in, as has the family and also the community around her, in order to get the kind of gain that she has achieved. She now has talent, clearly, that has been realized. She has visibility. She is recognized. She has recognition. She has status. She is she was already a minor name in her field as a very young and up-and-coming musical talent. And she has social networks that she has now developed through her own efforts and some help from her parents through their musical connections throughout the country in both classical and jazz. She has the confidence that comes with that success. So already it's looking pretty good for Jess. She's also a lovely person, which is fantastic, in that none of this has gone to her head. She's very grounded and down to earth. So hopefully this career will unfold and the gain will continue as she continues to make the investment. Okay, so that looks like a good story. It's a lovely story. And I'd like to now backtrack to a bit of a history lesson to bring us back up again to that same place, our current times, but now thinking more widely about this idea in our society that if you make a lot of effort, you can get the kinds of results that Jess is experiencing and benefiting from now. And what does that mean in our practice? Ooh, so we don't want that yet. So, can I minimize that somehow? Or we've seen it, we can stay. Another word for the pain that I am talking about, the investment, the effort. Another word, and a word that I want to use to explore this a bit, is the word agony. Have you ever been in that place where the effort you are making to achieve something feels a bit like hard work? Yeah, a few nodding heads. Okay. I'd like you to turn to the persons beside you in pairs and just talk to each other a little about something you have done where you had to make a great deal of effort, and to tell what that effort was and what you had hoped the gain would be. Maybe you made the gain, maybe you didn't. Maybe you got to the top, maybe you didn't. But just share some of your stories about making an effort to get a result with each other, please. I'll bring you to a close in a moment, so if you want to bring your story to a close, whoever is out telling the story. Okay. Not yet. Not yet. Okay. If I may, I'd like to sample just the topics that you were talking about and what the game was at the end of that. Would anybody like to volunteer what their story was about? Or what the story they listened to was about, if you're shy about your own story? Yeah?
So I think it was quite hard to start to think about what it
I'm sorry, get a bit louder.
Yeah, so at first it was really hard to figure out what I would be gaining or what I've done, because I kind of feel I'm a pretty lucky bastard sometimes, that I just gain a lot without a penny. But my friend over here just said that, how about your graduation? I know that you've graduated. Oh, well, that took me 8 years, so about 5 years more than normally. And that was pain. That was like sweat and tears and blood for 2 weeks. And I actually gained the graduation. I got the paper afterwards. That was just a simple example that I had.
Yeah.
With a little help.
Well done. Maybe one more example, somebody with something quite different, perhaps. When I was asking myself this question, I called it my PhD. Somebody else? Tell us a different story. Thank you.
I'm internal and I have a really difficult boy in my class. He's 11 years old and I started in August, and he was just 3 times per day. He was throwing everything around and yelling and pushing everyone, and that lasted for a month, and I was thinking that I will die here and I will change the career, and this is really awful to be a teacher, and I tried to be patient, but that was really a hard time. And then 2 weeks like that now, we had to talk with the psychologist and everyone, and he got help, and I think that I was helping him too. And now 2 weeks ago, he left a message for me, and it was said my name, Vilja, and 3 hearts after that. And then I felt that was really the game for that. Or the game I had for a long time.
Okay, thank you very much for both of those stories, and they will help me in my analysis as we go on too. They couldn't have been better pitched. The word agony comes from the Greek, and it was originally a place. It was called the agon, and the agon was what we would call the arena. I am in the arena now. And the arena is where the citizens of the city-state would come to demonstrate their skills, their abilities in a range of arts and sports. We think of an arena in Greek terms as being the origins of the Olympics and the idea of it being a sporting place. But in fact, it was also for the arts, for poetry, for playwriting, for music, as well as for the sports. And interestingly, it was not a competition in the way that we now understand competition. It was not somebody wins and somebody is second and somebody is third. What was judged by the audience, the citizens who would come to watch, was whether you had done the best that you could. So everybody could be the winner. Thumbs up for the people that had really made the effort, and the crowd thought there was no more we could expect from you. And thumbs down for those, no, you didn't get it. You could have gone a bit further and you haven't put in the prep to do that work. And that was how they were judged by the crowd at the time. And the place name, the agon, then became associated with the idea of the effort, the pain it took to be able to stand there and perform in front of your community. And so it became the agony. And of course, when you were getting the thumbs up, the other side of the agony was the ecstasy of being judged to have made the most of your talents. So Jess is just in that situation of just beginning to experience the game, the pleasure of the game. That's where the idea, if you like, in our culture comes from of the meaning of life, the meaning in our lives being about performing well at some specific talent that we seem to have, whatever that might be. That's where it becomes valued in a culture, to our knowledge, for the first time, and becomes promoted as the purpose, the central purpose of a citizen of those city-states. Work was not part of their lives. It was all about the performance. I'd like to take us a big jump now into Middle Europe and the medieval period, when apprentices, and Pavel has made reference to this because it is the model on which the TIOS program is based. Apprentices would go on a peregrination in order to learn their craft, their trade. And they were bound by their guild to leave the city in which they were born and where they became tenured to a particular craft, let's say blacksmith. And they would have to go and learn their craft in another city. And they were not allowed back into their home city until they had been, if you like, graduated. Their apprenticeship had been served, and they have been found to be a member of the guild, a full member of the guild. Only then could they come back to their home city. So the idea here is that in order to gain your talent, you have to go away before you come back. So it is the idea of being on the way that Paavo may have spoken about a little bit when he was talking Finnish, that begins here. And those apprentices, of course, when they came back, brought back with them all the new knowledge that was spreading around from the other craftsmen in the guild from other cities, and then would share them with the members of the guild in their own city. So it was a way of knowledge and skills spreading around Europe and around those guilds. Another leap forward for another concept, 16th century, and this time the seafaring nations of Holland, Spain, Portugal, and of course England. And at the time of the 16th century, we of course were fighting wars with Europe. It's a tendency we have. And at that time, we needed a lot of money to fight those wars. We didn't have enough money in the royal bank, the Tower of London, where the money was kept, to pay for all of the things that were needed to fight the war at that time with Spain. And so the Queen Elizabeth I, talked to the merchants of the city and said, how do we make money? I'm going to give you the right to go out into the world and find resources from the new discoveries we are making in Asia and beyond and Africa, and bring those back from which we can then make money, which will then finance the war. Of course, this was a very risky venture. No one person could afford to do it because it was a big expense to put a big ship together and send it off for 2 years in the hope it might come back with some treasures aboard. In that day, one of the most precious things was nutmeg, but it could be spices, it could be silks, it could be other exotic goods. And so what they did, of course, was they would have come together to invest in a ship. Soon realized that didn't work either, because there was a 1 in 5 chance that the ship would come back. 4 ships never made it. They would sink or be attacked, or simply not find the goods to trade with. So they changed their tactics, and instead of them investing in 1 ship, everybody invested in 10 ships. And 10 ships would go off, and you'd have 1/10 of a share in each of those ships. But if 2 of them came back, which was the average, then you were wealthy for the rest of your life, because the goods from those 2 ships were enough to make everybody who had invested in them very wealthy, including the crown, who could go on funding their war. So we have the idea coming now into the idea of managing the risk of the pain of making an investment, and that this idea of pain, making a risky investment and managing your risk by spreading your risk, in this case, comes from now out of the civil society into the economic life of the country. And it becomes part of what we expect of our merchants, to take risks, to make new achievements. We bring that fast forward to the 19th century. Then in the 19th century, we start to see the real benefits of those inventive scientists and industrialists beginning to make a difference to the quality of life for large numbers of people as industrialization begins to take place. Now we have a different kind of pain and a different type of gain. In the UK, the 18th and 19th centuries were a time when the peasants living off the land were forced off the land by people who wanted to claim ownership of it, because they wanted to go into more industrial ways of farming. They wanted to dig up the rocks and the minerals, and they had no need of people getting in the way, making their living from the land. So they cleared the land of people, and those people had nowhere to go. But in the cities, the newly emerging cities, where the industries are beginning to take off, then there is a place to go, and there is work. And the nature of our relationship with the state, between the state and the people of the country, becomes that of a citizen. The idea that you are now a member of society and you work for an employer, and in return you get some gain for the effort that you make. So we have a social situation where there's a big pain of the change, the transformation that was necessary for the industrial world to emerge, and the gain of that industrial world in terms of the goods, the services, and the way of life, which was very, very hard, of course, for those early laborers, those early industrial workers who worked very, very hard in very dangerous conditions for very little return, very little reward. At the same time, it was realized by those in power, the elite at the time, that these new workers were going to be able to ask for more rights. They were being asked to contribute to the greater good of society, the emerging nations of Europe, and they needed something in return. And out of that comes the idea of the social contract, which Rousseau had outlined some 100, 150 years before. And so we now have this arrangement where it's okay, you will give up certain rights, you will sacrifice certain rights and privileges in return for the state looking after you, in return for certain opportunities. And with that, of course, one of those rights is the right to vote, the right to be a citizen of that society, to actually have a voice in that society. And so through the 19th century, as probably in every country in Europe at different points in history, we see the abolition of slavery. Then we see the men who own land being given the right to vote alongside the elite, the establishment. Then we see all men being given the right to vote, even if they do not own property. And finally, of course, we see women being given the right to vote. We got to it quite late in England in the 1920s. When was it in Finland? Do you know? I'm curious.
2010.
It hasn't happened yet.
1903.
1903. I thought it was earlier than us. Yeah. Scandinavia was, I think, quite well ahead. Norway, I think, was the first country in which women got the right to vote. So we have this idea of the social contract and the need of the industry for workers who were compliant, who were happy to go along with this social contract. But as industry got more and more skillful, then the opportunities in industry for those working class people became increasingly visible. There was a need for more skill. There was a need for administration. There was a need for more knowledge in all of those industries. And so opportunities for skilled workers, opportunities for managers, middle managers, and gradually this idea that we have in our society of the middle classes begins to emerge as not just a small group in society of administrators and bureaucrats and managers, but a big, eventually the biggest group in society, as more and more people aspire, have the opportunity, if they put in, if they make the investment, if they get the education, the skills and the knowledge, they too could progress up the ranks, get a better job, more money, bigger house, more comfort around them. And there we have the origins of our, if you like, our modern society embedded there. If you make the effort in your education, in your vocation, in your profession, then you will get the reward of a good job and a good income and all of the comforts that go with that. I want to bring nature in now. We haven't mentioned nature. We mentioned adventure, but we haven't mentioned nature. Rousseau brings nature in. I mentioned him already because he already brings in the idea in his book, Emile, that as civilization begins to develop in this direction towards a modern and industrialized society, that society is corrupt, that it is wicked, that it is a source of many temptations and immorality, and that the only place where one can be developed as a good citizen, to develop the right values and attitudes, is in nature, away from that civilization and in the company of a mentor. And he explores this ideal in his book, Emile. Of course, the opposite view was also held. Hobbes, the philosopher, held the view that actually it is our nature that is evil, our animal instincts, and that it's only civilization that can actually put those basic instincts under control. And of course, those instincts were massively under control, our sexuality, our physicality, in lots of ways in our 19th century societies. And it was considered important to educate the working classes into this morality in order that they didn't rock the boat, we would say. They didn't upset things, and that they adopted what was considered to be the norms of that society, including the idea that if you make an effort, you deserve a reward. The Romantics carried that idea on, of course, as a response to industrialization, the idea of the grand tour, to travel through Europe, to see the dramatic sites of the classical ruins of Greece and Rome, but also to see the drama of the Alps and the Rhine Valley, to see the big, impressive works of nature in Europe. And that, of course, is another big influence upon the idea that to make the effort that you make is an effort of traveling, of going away for maybe some years on tour before you come back with the wisdom that you acquire from having rubbed shoulders with the classics, the old civilizations and their knowledge, and seeing the power of nature and the sublime experiences that that brings about. Darwin, if you like, puts a cap from the scientific world on this idea of pain and gain when he comes up with the idea of the survival of the fittest and the concept of the struggle for survival, that it is a fight, and in doing so ignores all of the things that take place in society that are cooperative and collaborative, in nature, that are cooperative and collaborative between organisms, between individuals in a species, or indeed between species. He emphasizes the survival of the fittest and the struggle for survival, which, if you like, is another parallel for us of this same metaphor of you have to make a lot of effort in order to win your space, to keep your family alive and to keep yourself going. So we have the modern idea of progress, the idea that anybody in a meritocracy in Western Europe or a Western civilization can rise through their education, through their career, to be somebody who is getting in return a decent salary and the recognition and status that comes with their work. And of course, in our society now, the main feature of a person's adult identity is their work. And this is now true for both men and women, and in that we now share that possibility of finding our identities in work, although perhaps still not fully equally in some places. We see the rise of that social mobility that's supposed to come about from all of this, that somebody who comes out of a working class family can become a hero. We have Jess Gillam, we have the Olympic stars of the last Olympic Games, and probably every Olympic Games. The one that Mo Farah comes to mind, the long distance runner, a British gold medal holder who comes from a broken family, a difficult social background. He was a problem at school, and only his PE teacher noticed that he had a talent. and that he nurtured that talent and kept him at school by just saying, okay, all you do is run. Don't bother about maths, don't bother about science, just run, but come to school. And eventually, of course, that pays off. And Mo Farah finds through the discipline of running, the self-discipline, to overcome his anger and frustration at whatever it is that his teenage years are causing him to struggle with. And in the end, through all of that effort, and there are many, many Olympian stories of this kind, he becomes a gold medal holder and a role model in our society. Jess Ennis, for example, who is another running star, another British running star with a gold medal in the Olympics, has just stood up in which city is it? Sheffield, where she comes from. We have a footballer in Sheffield who was convicted of rape, went to jail and was released from jail after serving half his sentence. And the football club is considering taking him back on as a football player. He has not ever shown any remorse or repentance. And she, Jess Ennis, has just come out to say, I want my name taken off the stadium where you play if you give him a place again to play football in your team, because he should not be a role model for British youth of today. So they're powerful people when they have these opportunities in society. They're very considered to be placed on a high pedestal of great moral rightness and to represent certain values. But of course, this journey of making the effort to get the result is no longer the train journey that I experienced as a young person growing up in my society. By train journey, I mean, although I was the first person in my family to go to university, the way you went about getting to university and getting to a profession, or if you went another route into a trade, was laid out for you by society. It was, you were tested at 11, and at 11 you went this way or that way. You were tested again at 13, you would go science or arts. You were tested again at 16, and maybe at that point you would leave school and go into learning a trade or an administrative skill, or you would carry on. You were tested at 18, and then you maybe leave school or go to university. If you went to university, the subjects you did at A-level would define the subject you did at university, and the subject you did at university would give you entry into a career. It's like a train line. You know where the stations are. You just have to turn up at the right station according to the test that you took, get on the train to take you to the next stop, and so on. They happen at set points in your development as a young person, and as a result, you end up, in my case, it would have been a geologist if I had followed that pathway to its logical conclusion. I jumped the train and became a teacher instead. Because I didn't like the idea of being a commercial geologist. Today, that is not the story. If you're a young person today, it is very difficult to see what the map is of that progression from, let's say, 11 or 12 years old to, let's say, 25 years old. That journey now is like a car ride. The car's parked there, if you can find it. If you can get in it when you like. You can set off in any direction. There may be a map, but it may not be complete. You may not know how to read it. You may not actually be able to find it. Even if you can read it and you've set off, you may find you get lost. It's a very complicated map with lots of junctions and turnings, some slow roads and some fast lanes. There are cul-de-sacs, places where you get lost and stuck, can't find your way out. Might say drugs or gangs, for example. You might actually do very well and go straight down the motorway to, like Jess Gillen, being a star. However, that's the nature. It is a map, and there is a very complicated pathway, if indeed there is a pathway at all. And most importantly, it's very difficult to know where you're going to end up. And wherever it is, it's probably almost certainly not where you started out thinking where you were going to end up. Your destination is either unknown or turns out to be something quite different from the thing that you imagined. Bear in mind that for an 18-year-old today going into the world of work, 70% of the jobs that 18-year-old can do had not been thought of when they were 5. So how do you educate somebody for jobs you don't even know are going to exist? That is a very different world. And of course, in the last 10 years, that world has changed again dramatically. And the more I talk to young people, the more I find, first of all, most of them, a large number of them, not the most of them, but a very significant number of them are not in work because they haven't yet found work. There are 42% of young people in the UK are in university. And if you talk to many of my other students in my university, they will tell you they're there not because they want to do the subject, because they couldn't think of anything else to do. If I got the grades, why wouldn't I? I don't really want to go 27,000 pounds in debt in order to go to university. But what else could I do? Which is not a very good place to start from to motivate them for learning in an undergraduate course. In the outdoors, of course, we're a bit luckier. Most people have some motivation to be where they are. Also, those young people that have work, it's typically temporary, casual, part-time, probably low paid. And on average now, if you when you interview young people in the UK, they say it is the age of 25 before they actually get a job in a career, and probably not the career they had in mind at the age of 20. So it's 5 years of uncertainty, of low income, of insecurity, before they begin to get their foot on the ladder. This effort that they had made, the significant effort that they have made now, because they are in the driver's seat in this individualistic society. We expect them to sort it out for themselves, so they have to make so much more of the effort for themselves. We don't give them that guide. Is turning out to lead nowhere. In the society where the job you do is the main reason that your identity, on which your adult identity is based. In Britain, I don't know what it's like. In Finland, it's different in different European countries, I know. But in Britain, we have, in the last 10, 15 years, polarized work, and we have quite a lot of very well-paid jobs, or a number of very well-paid jobs, a great deal of low-paid jobs, and we've stripped out all those jobs in the middle, where people make reasonable salaries. That's area of the least, reducing employment over time after time. So, to my picture. The outdoors, as this story unfolded, and I'm going to pick it up at the sort of 1950s. This was 1953. But it had already started much earlier, maybe 50 or even 100 years before. The exploits of explorers and adventurers became big symbols in our society for this idea that if you make the effort, you will get the return. They were celebrated. This photograph would have been taken 2 days before Queen Elizabeth II was crowned Queen of England. The news that the conquest of Everest, the ascent of Everest, had been successful, this is the first ascent of Everest, was delayed for 2 days in order that it could be announced on the same day that the Queen was crowned. So the link between our society's norms and values and the performance of some of our big symbolic heroes is demonstrated very vividly by that. Sir John Hunt, later Lord Hunt, wrote this epic story. the narrative of the adventurers and explorers from Victorian times, right through the early part of the 20th century, and still right the way through the latter part of the 20th century, these narratives of these people who made big sacrifices and big efforts to get big results was an important way in which we represented and reproduced that value back in our society. I give you the painting of the same moment on the summit of Everest, this time with both Hillary and Tenzing. This time you can tell which is Hillary and which is Tenzing. That previous photograph, they have never disclosed who it was that reached the summit first. Hillary died keeping it a secret. Tenzing is still alive, but has not ever and probably will never say. I think that's wonderful. And on this picture, I think what I want to focus on is that it is no longer the ascent of Everest that is being celebrated in this popularized version of the story, but it is the conquest of Everest. And it's a chapter of the final assault. So nature here is seen as the arena. Remember the arena, the place of agony, where this assault takes place and the effort is made and nature is conquered, and this conquest of nature is celebrated as an achievement. John Hunt, impressed by the character development that took place amongst the climbers who are on the Everest expedition, following the footsteps of one of the explorers who was in Antarctica with Scott, who came back, Murray Levick, and founded in the 20s, the late 20s, the British Schools Exploring Society, which you see here, conquering their own peaks. And these were the expeditions carried out by the public schools. In Britain, public schools means private schools, the ones that are fee-paying. These elite schools would start to go on expeditions to reproduce these exploits of the explorers. And John Hunt founded the Endeavour Trust. Endeavour, another great word to play with in our field. This idea, if you have an endeavour, an effort, that you will get your results. And John Hunt went on to found the Endeavour Trust, which took this idea of expeditions from the elite schools and made them available to the public schools, to the state schools, to the schools of everyday children. And that movement has been a very powerful movement, so that today maybe 4,000 or more expeditions go abroad from the UK, 4,000 youth expeditions from schools and youth groups and the like, following in this model of the effort that you must make. Big effort in fundraising and the challenge that you face in going to a foreign place in a different environment in order to win back. Sometimes the winning back is represented by personal gain, your graduation. Sometimes it's represented by the good you do for others in terms of your student and her achievement under your coaching, mentorship and support. So it might be that you give service to a community in a developing country. It might be you bring back science, scientific knowledge, maps and glaciated landscapes and so on. The British Schools Exploring Society are one of the first groups to actually bring back evidence of climate change in the 50s, demonstrating the retreating glaciers were a common phenomenon worldwide through their efforts, endeavours. And just to make sure I bring Outward Bound into the frame, I didn't have to search far to find a reasonable summit image for Outward Bound either. And of course, the first mountain school, the first Outward Bound mountain school was founded where I live in the English Lake District at Eskdale. And that's an interesting story because the first school was a sea school, as you probably know. You're all well and steeped, I'm sure, in Outward Bound history. And then the sea school, the people who ran it initially were all ex-Navy. And they had a discipline, an order, a structure like that on board a ship. No part of the day would be unoccupied, because if it was, the sailors would get up to mischief. So you worked very, very hard, and you were organized into watches, and you were given lots of tasks to do all the time, and you were so tired at the end of the day you fell asleep, and there weren't any nuisance in the dormitories. When they went to Eskdale, the second school, initially was also going to be a sea school, and the third one indeed was a Locheel, although it was actually a ship in itself initially. The second one went to the mountains under the influence of a famous British mountaineer who said, I think you could do a little bit of mountaineering anarchy in the outward bound tradition. So it went to Eskdale. Some of the sailors came up from Abu Dhabi to bring with them their experience, but because it was the mountains, they brought in the mountaineers to work alongside the sailors. And somehow this mix of two things, the anarchy of the mountaineers, hey, we'll get up when we're ready. We don't care too much about rules and regulations. We just like the freedom of the hills. That tradition somehow mixed with the discipline of the sailors to form what is now thought of as the outward bound way. There's somehow this sort of self-reliance that people will face up to the challenges that they're presented to them, and in that structure they will flourish and blossom and move forward and become somebody in their societies, in their communities. That idea that Kurt Hahn held very dearly, and the way in which it came about is a fascinating story, and we could come back to that in the discussion when we talk about this balance between is outward bound, and indeed our venture education more generally, a place in which we should reproduce the values of our society. The no pain, no gain story being about social mobility, being about progression as a society, but as individuals within that society, climbing the social ladder, making your life a career, valuing work above all other things? Or should the effort we are making and the gain that we get be aimed at something else, other things, especially at this time of change, when those young people that I spoke about have lost confidence in that narrative, that if they make the effort, they'll get the reward. They don't believe that. The 20-year-olds of my country don't believe that. I think that's probably quite widespread in many parts of Europe. They've lost the trust in the society to provide a pathway and provide the opportunity that that story actually needs to deliver. They're not getting the benefit, even though they're still being expected to make the effort. And of course I'm generalizing, and of course there are always the Jess Gillans. But today, it is not just unemployment that is challenging us. We have increased social inequality. Certainly in Britain, I think worldwide, as globalization proceeds, the difference between the haves and the have-nots is simply widening. That is a challenge for the future. It's already manifested itself in British society amongst young people in riots, at several flashpoints. And I know it's a great concern to our government that it could be a point of social instability. We also have an environmental crisis. We can't go on exploiting the planet the way that we have in order to deliver a higher standard of living, a better quality of life. We have to define quality of life in some new kind of way so that we don't live beyond our means. At the same time, technology is meaning that we can produce lots of wonderful goods, some of them very sustainably, but we don't need people to do the production. We don't need those skilled, knowledge and knowledgeable people, those middle classes anymore, to do that work. Technology can do it for us. All we need is people to sweep the floor and somebody else to count the money at either end. And the people in the middle are increasingly being squeezed out by technologies. And that's going to go on more and more rapidly. Technology is not slowing down in its innovation. So what will life be about in the next generation? Well, of course, I'm not going to answer that question if you were hanging on my last word. And I don't think anybody can. But what would you need to teach? What experiences would you need to offer to support the people that are going to be trying to find their way in that situation? What is it that they need to be making an effort to achieve? How do we give them a sense of value and identity in our society at a time when these changes are taking place and are taking place in a way that we cannot anticipate where they will end up? So there is a job to do. Just hold young people at the moment as they enter this new world. And there is a job to do, maybe even to influence the direction in which it might go. After all, most of us here have found a great deal of our identity outside of our work, in the things that we do in nature, the adventures that we have and the people we adventure with define us as much maybe as our work, and some of us have even made it our work. So we have another way, we have another aspect, as Jess Gillam does. She has her music. She may make a living from it, but she will never, whether she makes a living or not, she will always have the music as something to define her and to give her identity and to give her life meaning. So what do we do to help that process along? Do we go on reproducing the old values that work so well to give us the quality of life we currently enjoy, or do we consider how to make things move forward as part of the agents of change that might help us to prepare for the uncertainty of the future? Thank you.